Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're back to talking about Secret of the Mimic, because it's been out for a while and I am super excited to share what theories we've been cooking up. When it comes to solving certain aspects of the franchise and tying up loose ends, I'd go as far to say that this game has done more for us than any other FNAF game in the past. So, grab your data divers and let's get into it. I think that the first thing we should clear up is the characters in this game. Not Arnold, the protagonist, but the ones in the backstory, namely Edwin, David and Fiona. We know what happens between Edwin and David, but Fiona is a rather new face in the franchise. Put simply, Fiona is Edwin's wife. As for the Mimic, there are two models of Mimic endoskeletons that we know of, M1 and M2. M2 is a Mimic that we try our best to survive against throughout the entirety of the game. It's the one that was exposed to violence and hence became violent. M1, however, was built as a replacement for Fiona. But that begs the question, why did Fiona need replacing? Well, throughout the game, you can listen to audio tapes which give insights on hidden lore details. One of these audio tapes has Fiona talking about how she'll need to leave for a few days to help the Fall Fest crew set up.
I have to go help the Fall Fest crew, just for a few days until the installation is finished. It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong, just in case.
We know from Help 1 to 2 that Fall Fest went up in flames, and going off those obvious implications, we can also assume that Fiona was present the night of the fire. Long story short, she was killed in the fire. So that's the M1 in a nutshell, but we also have the other Fiona machine, the giant box that resembles the mixes from Ruin. Well, to further explain this, you first need to talk about the location of the MCM. Murray's costume manor is seemingly placed in the middle of nowhere, right? Kinda like how the Pizzaplex in Security Breach is also in the middle of nowhere. See where I'm going with this? No? Well, how about this? In the Scooper ending of the Ruin DLC, you're sat in a control room with a relatively large window, and the Scooper is on the outside of that room. Now take a look at the Springlock suit assembly room inside the MCM. Control room, relatively large window, and giant claw, which can be replaced with the Scooper rather easily. And this isn't the only time that a scoop of sorts is mentioned in Secret of the Mimic. When we first meet Dolly, she says that she needs to scoop out the organic material inside the Springlock suit that we're wearing. And we all know that the Scooper is more than capable of removing insides. So yes, the scooping room seems all too familiar as well, but that's not even the most convincing piece of evidence. Let's go back to Security Breach, towards the end when you go down to the pizzeria simulator level, right before the burn trap boss fights. When you exit the elevator, one of the first things you see is a giant Freddy head. Now, let's go towards the ending of Secret of the Mimic for the parachute.exe ending. When you enter one of the rooms, you find yet another giant Freddy head. All this to say that the Pizzaplex was built on top of the MCM as well. God, these people will just do anything to save costs. And if the MCM is underneath the Pizzaplex, it's also exactly where Ruin's ending takes place. After all, that explains why some of the Mimic's costumes are there in the final chase scene. Now, just before we can explain the mixes, we need to discuss which ending of Secret of the Mimic is canon. At the time of writing, we know of 3 endings to the game, and I don't think there'll be any more. There's a good ending, where the Mimic stops its murderous rampage and goes back to being like David again. The bad ending, where the Mimic kills you and stuffs you into Prototype Freddy. And the secret ending, where the Mimic causes your van to crash and ends up taking your data diver. We can instantly rule out the good ending, because we know the Mimic is still around and still a threat by the time Ruin comes to pass, so that just leaves the bad and secret endings to the game. I personally think it's the bad ending, because if it's true that the Pizzaplex is built on top of the MCM, that would be where the Mimic is still trapped when Ruin happens. Confused? I'm not surprised, so let's try to explain this a bit better. In the bad ending of Secret of the Mimic, the M2 is still in the MCM factory. It doesn't seem to care much about leaving at this point. Heck, it even returns specifically to stuff us into a suit. Now, this means that we can assume that the Mimic is still in the facility whenever the mixes is activated. meaning from that point onwards, the M2 cannot escape, which then leads into Ruin where Cassie deactivates mixes, which does let the M2 escape. So, this would mean that the bad ending is the canon one, because it's the one where the Mimic stays in the MCM, unlike the secret ending where the Mimic just walks off into the distance with your data diver. Now, let's explain the mixes in full. We knew from the Help Wanted 2 update that the mixes would be included in some way during the game, but we didn't know how, and I think everyone kind of forgot about it on release. However, if we take a look at Fiona's server, it looks virtually indistinguishable from the mixes. In other words, the mixes is a reprogrammed or repurposed Fiona to keep the Mimic at bay and trapped in the MCM under the Pizzaplex. As for who repurposed Fiona, we still don't really know who it was. For all we know, it could have been Edwin, but at least we know where the mixes came from now. Speaking of Edwin, you may be wondering, what on earth happened to him? After he beat up the Mimic, we're told that he just ditched everything and ran off, only to return right before a security breach, just like in the books. However, this is where I think the games go off on a tangent. In Edwin's office, we can listen to a tape that plays audio of a conversation between M2 and Edwin. Although in this tape, something seems wrong. Edwin says that he can't move his legs, and continuously apologizes to the M2 for taking out his anger on it, and begs it to call for help, all while the M2 just continues to mimic Edwin and acting as if the real Edwin is David. At the start of the game, we're told that Edwin ran away, and at the end of the game, Fiona tells us that he shot himself away in the house, which also just so happens to be right next to the MCM. But surely if Edwin went missing, the first place people, namely local authorities, would look is his house, right? And if he was there, they definitely would have found him. But what if he wasn't there? After all, Fiona did say that her communications with him were severed, and there was no evidence of Edwin ever being present in the Pizzaplex from a game standpoint. So, I think that the M2 either killed Edwin or prevented him from getting any help that could have saved his life. Maybe it even stuffed him into an animatronic suit. The final main point I want to talk about today is the relationship between Edwin and Fazbear Entertainment. From the Parachute.exe ending, we can see a prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, which is almost identical to the FNAF 1 pizzeria, with a few minor tweaks. So, why was it Edwin making these and not Henry? After all, Henry is one of the company owners and is known for being the engineer between him and Afton, right? Why on earth would they need Edwin? Well, firstly, it's probably a lot cheaper to hire Edwin to do it himself, rather than them buying all the raw materials needed for animatronics and decorations and such. And knowing how cost efficient Fazbear Entertainment is, this definitely seems like something they would do. However, it also seems like Edwin was becoming more valuable to Fazbear Entertainment as well. Throughout the game, you can collect pieces of mail, which are basically just emails you can access through a computer. Some of these have zero plot relevance, whilst others do. But this one in particular caught my eye. It reads, "I need the rest of the Murray staff info. I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of the new franchise locations?" And to top it all off, the letter is signed by none other than W.A., William Afton. Afton was using Edwin to transfer employees from the MCM to Fazbear Entertainment, and was incentivizing Edwin with promising offers of management. Of course, Afton probably had no intentions of keeping these promises, but it seemed to be working nonetheless. But by the looks of it, Edwin seemed to also have prototypes of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, so that shows he goes back much further. So it's possible that he sold the original Springlock suits to them as part of an earlier contract. But again, what about Henry? Well, to be honest, I have zero clue why Henry isn't the one working on these suits. Maybe he is, but he's working together with Edwin. Or maybe it's just cheap to have Edwin do all the legwork himself. One thing's for certain though, Fazbear Entertainment still has many more secrets waiting for us to get our hands on. Don't worry, I do want to do more theories regarding this game, because there's still plenty we haven't covered in today's video. And there's other small details that I think are quite cool, like how Mr. and Mrs. Helpful are based off Edwin and Fiona, or how we have audio of Edwin destroying the Mimic, or how the MCM was originally Edwin's father's company. But that's going to be it for today's video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.